Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. It is 10 o'clock in the Eastern United States. Thank you for joining for wherever you may be coming from. We have an exciting topic today. As you can see from my screen, we're going to be talking about bridging DevOps and SAP. In other words, how do you bring a DevOps style of development to your SAP landscapes? That's a challenge that people are wrestling with. In general, we're going to be covering today our SAP Transport Management Suite. This is an enterprise transport management suite that's designed to plug directly into the applications that you're already using today to manage your changes and for your enterprise. And so now we're able to extend transport management capabilities into those existing tools. We're going to talk about ServiceNow, we're going to talk about Azure DevOps, and we're going to talk about SAP Transport Management. And before we get into that, I'm just going to do a few words of introduction in case you're new to Core ALM, who we are and what we do. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about our history first. So we've been in business for about 15 years. The company was started when our CEO and founder left his position where he was the head of the Application Lifecycle Management practice, the ALM practice at SAP. He was working at SAP. He looked across the landscape. He didn't see another company that was really focused on exactly what we do today, which is the application lifecycle management processes and tools specifically for SAP customers, and saw that niche opportunity. At the time, SAP only had Solution Manager. It was even before the 7.2 release of Solution Manager, and saw an opportunity to go out and serve customers directly in that space. And since that time, we've been serving customers, I guess, with his connections and customers that he'd already made acquaintances with at SAP, was able to very quickly, solve people's problems, deliver, solutions to those problems. But it was about 2018 when we realized this problem that many customers had, which is that they're using for their SAP landscapes, they have tools like, at the time it was Solution Manager. Now we have Cloud ALM as well, coming as a replacement for Solution Manager. But they also have other tools for non-SAP applications. And for those, non-SAP applications, often you will use Jira or Azure DevOps or ServiceNow to manage those types of changes and business processes, implementation projects, agile processes, DevOps processes, which we'll talk about today. And so really saw an opportunity to build some integrations between those applications and SAP tools like Cloud ALM, at the time Solution Manager, Charm, Focus Build, and all of those Solution Manager components. Now Cloud ALM is coming out on the scene, and so we have extended our connectors to cover that. We've served some of SAP's largest companies, customers that is, and so those customers are running different types of processes. We have a lot of manufacturing customers, really goes across industries. We have manufacturing customers, we have companies that are in the life sciences or aerospace and defense, where, obviously security is a very utmost importance, but also having a very documented process. Same in the financial industry, very regimented processes. And we've checked the boxes for those companies in terms of validating that we can provide a solution that meets their needs. So we're confident that it can meet yours as well. We also have smaller companies, but obviously the biggest ones are the ones that give us the most challenge, and that's where we've grown. I'm going to talk briefly about what we do across the board. We cover all aspects of the application lifecycle management process, whether you're in, initial implementation. Let's say you're doing a major greenfield S4 project. We cover all aspects of that, from planning through design, testing, release management. Or if you're just in ongoing maintenance and support, or a combination of like smaller projects and ongoing maintenance, we cover all aspects of the lifecycle. For that, we have expertise in various tools, and we have integration to many of the tools that you see on the screen here to give you a full kind of soup to nuts coverage. And what we see our customers tell us is that they get the biggest bang for the buck the more that they bring into an end-to-end process. So if you can make your change management process holistic and tie it into the tools you're already using today, then you get the biggest bang for the buck. And that's what we're learning from our customers. The challenge has been in the past that Solution Manager And now Cloud ALM is kind of coming in to replace a lot of those solution manager capabilities, but it's not at the same level of feature parity, I would say. Solution Manager was a very mature product. Cloud ALM is an easier to use product, less restrictions, and kind of easier to get things going. But there's a lot of restrictions today. They're still in development with it, and it doesn't cover all of the features that most of our customers say they need at this point in time. So sometimes a hybrid strategy can work, but we have different options, for how to do that. So if you have specific questions, we'd be happy to discuss that here today, or to cover that in tailored, personalized discussion or demonstration. But what we see with those tools is, even if they are used, then there's additional tools that are out there, like Jira, Azure DevOps, ServiceNow. How can we get those tools to actually work together? That's been the biggest challenge that many of our customers have reported that they have before they start looking and exploring our solutions. And having multiple tools, at very least, it means you have the same information being entered into multiple systems. So you have different applications that you have to use. One screen over here does one thing, and another screen does another thing, but it's really part of the same overall end-to-end process. That can lead to data inconsistencies, duplication of effort, and in the worst case scenario, it could actually cause errors that end up in your production environment because something was missed, and the process can't be fully automated to prevent those types of challenges. We like to do as much as we can to help to automate those processes so that you don't have to report on exceptions. You would just basically trust that the process is going to restrict you from doing something that is harmful. And so to solve those problems, we've introduced different connectors. We have a Cloud ALM connector now. We've had in the past Solution Manager connectors for some time. And now our latest, which we're going to be talking about today, which is the direct transport management controls built directly into those tools that you use today. We call this our SAP Transport Management Suite, and it covers Jira, Azure DevOps, and ServiceNow. And we may add additional applications as we go through it based on customer needs, but those are the ones that we're going to be discussing today. So that really covers what we do in a nutshell. Just to list all the different product coverage from a process perspective, as I said, Solution Manager, Cloud ALM, and then the direct transport management capabilities in our Transport Management Suite, which we'll talk about today. So to show us how this all works and to discuss, how this can work for you, I'm going to bring together Valdrin Spihiai, who is an ALM expert. Valdrin spent time working at SAP back in the day as well, and we're lucky to have him join us now and be able to share what he knows about how this tool works. So I'll let you take it away. I don't know if you want to share slides first. There we go. Thank you.
Absolutely. By now you should be able to see my screen. Can you confirm?
Yes, you're good.
Hi again, everyone. As Steve mentioned, my name is Valdrin Spihiai, one of the ALM architects here at Core ALM. And in today's agenda, we're going to go through SAP TMS integration overview. So Steve gave you a brief idea of what the product is, but the goal is really for us to go deeper into this application and go through how do you manage transports with ServiceNow, Jira, and Azure DevOps. So we will be looking at all three applications and how you can utilize these three applications for you to be able to manage transports. And there's also some additional features that I will mention towards the end of the session, or everything that we do support with this application. Now, we're also going to go through a live demo. So we're going to go through ServiceNow initially. How do you create and manage the transports in SAP, and also Jira and Azure DevOps as well. And last but not least, we'll open the call for some questions and answers. I would suggest that in the meantime, if any of the topics during this presentation or the demonstration interest you, you could always list them in the chat, and then we'll be answering those questions at the end in the order that we get them. Now, so the TMS integration, or the direct TMS integration with transport management, you can manage transports directly from Azure DevOps, ServiceNow, or Jira. So what we mean by that is that we automatically integrate without any middleware the STMS from SAP into any of these three tools in here. So you could utilize your current workflows, for example, and I'll explain a little bit more. If you can make them restrictive, or you can have them completely open as you use them today without impacting any of your workflows that you currently have. Now, the features that we support, so some of the basic features, for example, are that you're able to create transports, you can release transports, you can also import the transports, and you could re-import, for example, at any given time. If something fails, you could utilize the re-import option as well. In addition to that, we also do, for example, transport coupling and decoupling. So at any given time, if someone, let's say, creates a transport in the system and you need to couple that to bring it within your workflow, you can do that. And also you could decouple one as well if required, for example, if it was created by mistake. We also support transport of copies. So this is a feature that you may have used in the past with other tools, for example, where you can copy the transport directly from any of these three tools and then import that into your QA or let's say the next environment that you need to in order to do testing without actually releasing the transport, and you can go back and forth as many times as you need to. We also support cross-system object locking. So, for example, any object locks out there, we do have that feature in there. We also have downgrade protection for any type of version management in the target environment as well. We also have a couple of different options, for example, for mass transport deployment. So this is, for example, if you have any type of weekly enhancements or monthly or larger projects, you could utilize this mass transport either in QA or, for example, in your production environment, where you could grab grab a list of all of the transports that you've created within a project and then import them in a mass transport deployment rather than import them one by one. So we pretty much support single and mass transport with this application. So we have all the features available. And then in addition to that, we also have retrofit and repack for this application. These are some of the more advanced features, for example. So especially if you have a M+1, M+2, if you have multiple development environments, this is where we can support you with retrofit, getting those directly into your M+1 environment, and also repack, for example, if you need to push something from your production into another like M+2 environment. Now, the ServiceNow integration with SAP STMS, there's a couple of different capabilities, or I would say ways that you could deploy this application. One of the most simple one that if you use ServiceNow today, for example, the simplest way will be, for example, if you just deploy a single tab similar to what we have in here. This is something that we provide with the application by default. So, for example, if you've seen the application within our ServiceNow store, you'll have this additional tab in here that you could automatically enable. And then from this point on, as long as you be integrated with the STMS, at that point, you could automatically see you could create the transports, you could release, and etc. directly within your ServiceNow workflow. Now, in addition to that, you could also have a restrictive or an optional workflow, meaning that, for example, if you see all of these certain or different tabs in here, you could restrict them by a specific the workflow within your ServiceNow. An example is when you're like a new and assess, maybe you just want to have the capability to create the transports and not import them. And probably when you're in implement stage at that point, you probably want to import those transports into your productive environment. So therefore, you could definitely restrict all of these buttons. And then we do provide this as an out of the box. It's not something that you need to design in ServiceNow. It's pretty much just options that you want to select based on your current workflow. In addition to that, we also support change tasks. So for example, here's a simple way. If, for example, you are using change tasks in ServiceNow, we could integrate the STMS directly with your ServiceNow change tasks, where, for example, you have one or a couple of change tasks in order for you to completely utilize the STMS under this change task. So an example is where you are in assess, You could, for example, have a specific change task to your STMS integration. Therefore, for example, you could customize those workflows when you, let's say you're in development, then you'll have these 4 different options in order for you to create transport, create task, couple or decouple a transport. Then in addition to that, for example, you could set somewhere where you are in to be tested, you could create and import an ATOC, let's say, into your QA environment. And then furthermore, when you get into successfully tested, you could release and import ATR. So this is very similar if you've used Charm or if you've used, for example, Focus Build. You could design a similar workflow within this change task without actually modifying your actual workflow or your standard workflow within ServiceNow. In addition to that, for example, is that once you complete the first change task, at that point, you could go through a CAB approval, schedule it, and then when you're in the implementation stage, at that point, you could authorize it for import, and then you could have the option of importing that TR within production. Again, the important part here is that you could utilize these change tasks and specifically restrict which of the buttons show up when you are in a certain stage. An example is, unless this is an implement and it's authorized for import, you will not see the option for import TR. And this is for primarily, for example, for end users. Therefore, they're not importing changes that are not approved into a productive or a QA environment. And then, as obviously, then you can go along with your review and close of ServiceNow. Now, in addition to that, now we're going to jump into Jira integration with SAP TMS. So, for example, if you're using ServiceNow and Jira both, but let's say, for example, if you have a choice of which tool you want to integrate STMS with, Jira integration with STMS is very similar to what I've explained in the previous slides. However, in here it's a new tool. Therefore, some of the screens are going to be slightly different. In Jira, what you'll notice is that we'll have a SAP Transport tab, for example, and then underneath the Transport tab that you'll have all of the different options of what you would like to trigger. In this case, for example, we'll provide all of the different options like create a transport, couple, decouple, and all of the additional features, such as, for example, creating a TOC and also importing, and in addition to that, also having a mass change option as well. Keep in mind, even for Jira, we also have a optional or restrictive workflow based on the statuses, for example. And what we mean by that is, if I go here into the next slide, what you'll see is that, for example, within your Jira, let's say your epics or your user stories, or for example, if you have any type of custom issue types in Jira, you could, for example, restrict these certain buttons in here directly based on the status that the Jira ticket is in. An example is if you want to design a complete custom workflow just for SAP within Jira, you could do that, and then you could determine, for example, which of these actions do you want to take when the Jira ticket is in a certain status. An example is in here, if let's say if this user story is in status in progress, at that point you want to be able to create a transport, maybe couple a transport, create a task, and etc. But however, any type of imports, any type of, let's say, create a TOC and etc., they're not going to be available in the status. The idea would be that if you design a workflow in Jira from let's say specific to SAP, you probably want to have something like when you create a TOC, the status should be in testing, for example. So those are the specific customization that you could make with very minimal effort, for example. Since this application, once it's deployed, it's pretty much will give you all of the options and will have a specific specific UI where you could, for example, restrict these options and not. And it fits directly, for example, within, let's say, your Jira or your ServiceNow application. Now, DevOps, so for Azure DevOps, you'll see very similar to Jira, for example, just given the fact that it's a different application. We'll have an additional tab in the Azure DevOps, let's say, work item type, where, for example, once you click on that tab, then you'll have all of the specific all of the specific buttons for Azure DevOps as well to do any of the actions that you need to. Again, it's also restrictive or optional for ADO based on the status as well. So you could completely modify that workflow that you have in Azure DevOps. The additional features, and this is very important, for example, especially if you have used or you have a specific tool that you're using today. So the additional features that we support with this application, so it's not necessarily just to create and import transports, but we also support other advanced features as well, such as, for example, we support transport groups. So adding any new tasks in existing transport requests, you don't necessarily have to go into, let's say, your SAP environment to create a task. You can do it directly from the change ticket. Any given time, for example, if you want to see what is the status of the transport request, you could refresh that in Jira, Azure DevOps, or ServiceNow. Any type of, for example, special handling. So, and if you need to maintain any type of pre or post checklist, so any type of checklist that you have that you need to do prior or post a transport, for example, especially if you have any manual steps that you need to execute, those are also some options that you have within the ticket. Re-import option. So an example is if you have any type of transport, let's say if it fails, you do have a re-import option. Therefore, you could, for example, re-import that transport a second time. In addition to that, we do have an authorization check in SAP. So what this means is that, for example, in order for a user to be able to see these options and create a transport, they need to have specific roles within that environment in order for them to create a transport. So just because you have access to Jira or ServiceNow or Azure DevOps does not mean that you are able to create a transport within SAP. So those authorizations will still be required within our application. And then also in addition to that, so you can map multiple landscapes within this connector. So meaning that, for example, if you have let's say a ECC, S4, BW, and etc., you can have as many landscapes as you need to within the application, and then you would define them similar to what you do within SDMS as well. We also fetch all of the users from SAP and then display them directly within one of the three tools, for example. So this way, if you're trying to assign a transport or create a transport, we will fetch the user list directly from SAP. Therefore, you can select that user to create it as a owner. And then last but not least, mass import of transports. I think I mentioned this earlier. So any type of orchestration where you need to import multiple transports at once, one or many, it's completely optional by just selecting the transports that you want to import at the same time within your target environment. Okay, now the second part of this webinar is going to be that we're going to actually go into the application and kind of give you an idea exactly what it looks like, and then what do you do with by creating a transport and etc. Now, the first one that we're going to look at is going to be into Jira. So what we'll do is we'll go into the application. So keep in mind our application is also on Jira Store. So for example, if you wanted to go and take a look at additional information for that application, you can search that in Jira Store or Marketplace under Core ALM. But once you deploy your application, so at that point, for example, you'll get something similar to this, where you'll have a transport application. Then you'll have some different information here, such as part of connectivity. So this is where you would connect your multiple landscapes that you have. Then in addition to that, we also have, for example, a mapping page in here where you could map multiple projects, for example, to your SAP SDMS for any of the landscapes. What's also very important in here, you could decide, for example, if you want the SAP TMS to be enabled for a task, for a story, for a bug, for a pick, or all of them, for example. Then in addition to that, we also, as I mentioned earlier, you could have a restrictive workflow, for example, where you would choose your status on the left-hand side, and then you would decide what type of action do you want it to be enabled for that status. An example is, and what I'll show you In the demo, in the to-do status, we're only going to have a couple of options. So we're going to be able to create a TR and create a task, but that's about it. But then when we go into in progress, then you'll have multiple other options, such as you can create and import TOCs, you can release a TR, you can import it into test, and etc. But however, the only time that we can actually import something into production is when the user story is in status done. But this is just an example from a demonstration perspective that we're going to go through today, but you can customize this in many different ways or however you would like, for example. So the first step that we're going to go ahead and just create a user story, and then we're going to provide just a simple title in here. So we're just going to say create an iDoc in SAP. Then I'm going to skip all of the options in here since we got to go through multiple applications. But what's very important in here, so even if you enable this application in your current workflow, what we'll recommend is that you add, for example, a specific tab similar to this, where if this is an SAP change, we're going to say yes. At that point, this will trigger the actual integration, meaning so now at this point, if we select that as a yes, we're going to see a option in here for the SAP transports. So now from the SAP transports, the options that we actually have, given the fact this is a restricted workflow, is that we're going to be able to create a transport, create a task, couple, decouple, or refresh. So those are really the only options that we have. And then you'll see some of these are grayed out. That's because we don't have a transport in here yet. So the first option is that we're going to go ahead and create a transport. So this was create a And then if you have multiple systems, something that I do within my demo environment, you'll have the systems will be displayed within the list in here. So we're going to select one of my ECC environments. And then you'll also have obviously the type of transport that you want to create, or both. In my case, I'm going to create a customizing transport in here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and assign this to myself. So I'm going to select my user. And then this is also very important. So we do also, for example, what we're doing here, we're fetching the user from SAP, making sure that the user exists in SAP in order for us to assign that transport. So I'm going to select my user in here. I'm going to also add a task. And then if you have any type of manual step, this is completely optional. You can also remove it from the change ticket. But if you want to enable any type of before manual steps, you can do this as well. We're going to click on create. And then this is last but not least, the transport was created in here, was assigned to me. Obviously, that is the name of the ticket of the transport. It will also display the actual Jira ID in there as well. The next step that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead into in my let's say SAP environment, and then this is the ticket that we just created on the transport. And let's say, for example, that I made some type of configuration. Given the fact this is a customizing task, I'm just going to go ahead and release it. So therefore, we're able to actually move it forward. Now, in this case, you don't have any options in here as far as to create a transport of copies. So based on because this is a restrictive workflow, I'm going to set this to in progress, for example. And then we're going to refresh this. And then you'll see that as soon as I refresh this, I am automatically going to have additional options in here for me to perform. Now, when this is in progress, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, create and import TOC. So I'm going to select the transport. So this is important because if you have multiple transports, the idea is that you can create a TOC individually for each transport that you need to, or multiple. So we're going to go ahead and create and import the TOC. And obviously, this is going to take a few minutes in order for this, because it's going to create the TOC, and then it's also going to import the TOC into my next target environment, which is my ECQ environment in this case. Now, at the bottom in here, it's going it's going to show you the TOC that was created. So especially because TOCs have a different number, let's say a TOC number. In this case, it'll show you the TOC number in there, and then that it was imported within your, for example, within your QA environment. So once you refresh it, once that's imported, at that point it's going to change the status from released into imported status. Now the next step is in here that, for example, you can go back and forth in here where you create multiple changes, for example, but really we're trying to also release and import this into my QA environment. The next step is that I'm going to select the transport, and then let me refresh this one more time, and then we're going to go ahead and release this transport. At this point, it's modifiable. So our goal is that we're going to release it, and then we're going to import it in my next environment. Now, you'll also have a couple of different columns in here, for example. So if you look at this, so it will show you what was the last import, what type of imports have been done, if there are also any type of CSOLs, or if there are any downgrade protection checks as well. So if there's any type of red flags, then you'll see those red flags within here, for example. So now, since this transport is released, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and import this transport. We do bring, for example, the different options that you have. So if you wanted to ignore some type of transport checks and etc., or overwrite originals, you also have these options directly from STMS that you could utilize. In my case, I'm just going to go ahead and import as is without ignoring anything. Now, once this is imported, the next step is that, for example, my next environment is my productive environment. So really the goal is in here that in order for me to import this into a productive environment, I'll have to move the ticket into my done status. So that just to kind of give you an idea that this is completely controlled by the statuses of the Jira workflow. So what we're going to do now is in here, so that I see that, for example, the transport was imported in my ECQ environment. And then the next step is that I am going to go ahead and set this to done. And then now you'll see that I have an option in here, for example, for me now to import this into my productive environment. Once I click on import, and then same options again. Now in this case, it's going to go ahead and import this into my ECP environment, and then the changes is completed. So regardless of the type of environment that you have, you'll be able to see all of the statuses and etc. directly from in here. Now, a similar process, for example, we're going to go through in ServiceNow. So we support all of the different change types in ServiceNow, for example. So a normal change, a urgent change, or even if you use some type of standard change, if you have any type of, for example, customized changes or additional changes that you have customized in ServiceNow, we support pretty much any changes with a TMS integration. In our case, we're going to go through a normal change, which we see used most often with most of our customers, and then we'll kind of just walk you through the process of how do you create and how do you import transports as well. This is also going to be a restrictive workflow, meaning that I'm going to have only certain actions to execute when I am in a certain status. So the first step is we'll just go ahead and provide a name for this. So we'll call this a ServiceNow. And then we'll give it just a quick description. And now, as you see in my tabs in here, you don't necessarily see the SAP tab yet. But as we go through this process, I'll show you, for example, so once we have this additional tab in here for where you have an SAP change, as soon as you mark this to yes, for example, at that point you'll see that you'll have a specific tab in here in order for you to be able to create a transport. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to go, you'll see all the options in here, but I can't perform anything yet because I haven't saved this change. But once I save this change, with SAP Yes, then you'll see that I'll only have, very similar to what I was showing you in Jira, I'll only have some certain options available in here for me to execute. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a transport from ServiceNow. So we'll provide the same description in here. Very similar, you'll have multiple, if you have multiple environments or landscapes, you're able to choose them directly in here. So we're going to create a transport directly within this dev environment, and then it's going to be a customizing transport as well. The interface is going to be similar, so we're going to go ahead and search, for example, for my user in here, and then I'll assign that. Again, I'm going to assign this to a task to myself again. And then I'm going to add, again, you can add multiple tasks for that transport if needed. And then I'm going to skip the manual steps and go ahead and create this transport. Now, any type of logs, any type of information, let's say if something fails, everything will be logged directly within the notes, in the notes of ServiceNow. So from an auditing perspective, if you need to see exactly who created the transport, who made any type of changes within the transports, all the logs will be automatically logged in here directly without any third-party tools. Now, since this transport is created, for example, also have a task that I assign to myself. The next step is that I'm going to go ahead and release this transport. So this is again within the same environment. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this, and then we should be able to see that specific change ticket in here. So you have the change ticket number, for example, the name of the ticket that we created is automatically assigned to the transport that we created. So the next step is that we're just going to go ahead and also release a transport as well, or the task. Now, at this point, once we do this, we're pretty much ready for us to move at least a transport of copies into a QA environment. So let's say we can do some type of testing. Now, I don't have those options yet to create that specific TUC. That's because the actual workflow needs to be in a different status. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and move this to assess. And then we're going to save it. Now in assess, I'm going to have some different options in here. So now I'm going to have create and import TOC or decouple, or just, for example, this refresh button, it's always going to be there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and select that specific transport, create and import a transport of copies. And then we'll give it a few minutes for this to create the transport of copies, or less than a few minutes. And then we'll come back in here and then we'll see, for example, what happened. So as you see, the transport of copies was created, it was already released, and it's being imported within your QA environment. So again, within the notes environment in here, you'll have all of the information that what did the integration actually do, for example, and who was the person that initiated this, and then who was the person that imported the, let's say, the TOC within the QA environment. So I'm going to go back to the screen again. Now, really, our next step is that we're going to import this change into our QA environment. But in order to do that, I need to go ahead and at least have this in my authorized status. So, for example, in order for users or for an end user to import the change into QA, they need to have this authorized first. The first step is that I'll go ahead and just quickly approve this. This is probably something that you do today in your cab, for example, but in our case, we're going to go ahead and approve it. So I'll have my cab approve this as well. And then at this point, it's within my scheduled status. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and set this into my implement status. And then now I have this import option in here. So what we'll do in here is we'll go ahead and import this transport into my QA environment. Let me just save it very quickly because I think I didn't save it yet. And then once you have this transport, for example, imported into your query environment, you can go ahead and then also have this change imported into your production environment. So again, for example, within this certain workflow, what we could do is we could import this change also into my next target environment, for example, and then at that point, you could also close this ticket. And then as you see, for example, all of the options here towards the bottom are going to disappear because this transport within the status review, these options were not selected to be controlled. So therefore, this transport, for example, it went all the way into your productive environment. Last but not least, we're going to go through and look into Azure DevOps. So the process is going to be very similar to what you've seen in Jira and also within ServiceNow as well. This is also completely, for example, once you deploy our application, it's going to be very similar where, for example, you have different landscapes in here, and then you have very similar, for example, your mapping where you could have different statuses and what you could do within this application. So an example, when you are in to do, you could create a TR. When you are in doing, create a TR and import the DOC, and then done, you could also import into your production environment. So now within Azure DevOps, the integration that I currently have is going to be around, for example, an Epic. So you'll also have this additional tab in here for SAP Transport. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add the title in here. And then we'll just give it a second. Then in here, you'll have, for example, all of the different options in here as well in order for you to create the transport. So given the fact that we don't have all of the time, we're just going to go through and let's say create a transport in here. And then you'll have, for example, the additional systems that you have integrated. And then as you navigate down, you'll have all of the options in here as well, including, for example, if you want to search for all of its specific users, you could just search for the users and it will automatically fetch all the users from SAP as well. And then once you create the TR, so you're pretty much, you'll have all of the different statuses and also the transport that you've created from in here. Now we're not going to go through all of the different workflows in here, though the process is going to be very similar to what we went through Jira and also ServiceNow. But within here as well, you'll also be able to control these different buttons and import and etc. directly from Azure DevOps. So that's what we wanted to show you today from a presentation and demo perspective. So I'm going to pass the call back to Steve to see if you guys have any questions.
Yes, thank you, Valdrin, and thanks for walking us through. I know it was a pretty fast-paced tour, so you can see that we have lots of different capabilities across those different applications. Like we talked about, you can see that instead of having a separate tool that you use to manage your transports, we're just taking those transport functions that you have in other tools, and we're embedding them directly into the tool that you're using, whether it's Jira, ServiceNow, Azure DevOps, and that's what you saw today. So please, if you do have questions, it's not too late. You can put additional questions in the chat. I have a few that I'm going to be calling up. The first one is, what are the prerequisites to get the software installed? Maybe you could cover that at a high level, Valdrin.
I can't, because we talked about 3 different applications, so they're slightly different. One item that I do want to mention is we don't require any type of middleware. I think that's a difference between our application and others, meaning that, for example, all for Jira, Azure DevOps, and also ServiceNow, you pretty much would deploy this directly on those tools rather than, for example, having any type of middleware. And then we would make a direct connection into your landscape that you want to manage your transport. So for example, if you have an S4 landscape and let's say you have a Jira instance, we would directly connect from your Jira to your S4 instance in order for us to have all of these functionalities that we show today.
Okay, great. And how long does it take generally to basically to run those that installation process?
That's fairly quickly, I would say. For example, just depending depending, for example, on how fast you can move on your network, I would say. An example, the main item is here that we need to be able to communicate between Jira and your, let's say, your S4 environment. So therefore, the main area here to look into would be about being able to have a direct connection there that's limited to only Jira, for example.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. And I know there's often security considerations, and so that sometimes takes a little bit of time, but we've always been able to get that to work. I think in general, it takes a couple of days to do the installation and configuration to get it actually working. Usually we budget around 4 weeks of time to do a full implementation. Does that sound about right on average based on your experience?
Or less, yes.
4 weeks or less, yeah. Usually it's less to do the technical parts. Okay, great. Next question here. I see I'm using ServiceNow today, and I want to make changes, or do I need to make changes to the process in ServiceNow? And will it require customizations?
No customizations required. So when our ServiceNow app, it's an approved app within the store. Once you deploy that, we will require, for example, that some of these additional fields get added into your change process, but that does not necessarily mean that you have to make changes to your change process. Now, there's two ways to deploy it. There's the restrictive workflow, but you can also just, if you want to just have this enabled into any of the statuses, and that's also possible as well without making any changes whatsoever.
Perfect. Okay, that's good. The next question talks about Jira. It says that they have multiple projects in Jira. Is it possible to have those multiple projects all connect up to transport management?
Yes, of course. I mean, as many projects as you need to. Once you deploy this, it can be utilized in any project within your Jira landscape, for instance.
Okay, perfect. And I see some people also chatting about the fact that they have multiple of these applications and trying to figure out the best path for that. I think, in general, there's often a complex landscape. Because this is generally tied to the transport management side, usually we would deal mostly with the system that is responsible for your change management process. So whether that's Jira or ServiceNow, or ServiceNow is very common for change management. So some people would want to tie into that. But then sometimes on projects, you may want to manage transports on a project. And for those things, you may use Jira or Azure DevOps. So I think we have lots of different options. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is intended to be as flexible as possible. Without, that's why, for example, doesn't require any type of middleware. So you could definitely embed it into your current change process. Or, for example, if you wanted to enhance it, you could design your current Jira, Azure DevOps, or ServiceNow, and have this additional features to manage your SAP changes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for walking us through that full tour. We're grateful for your contributions today and also for the rest of your attendance. Everybody who's watching this live, thanks for taking the time to join us today and staying till the end. For those watching the recording, again, thank you for participating and don't hesitate to reach out. I put up on the screen a link to our website. If you scan the barcode with your phone, that'll take you directly to our website resources page where you can sign up for upcoming webinars. We have some exciting topics that are scheduled for the future. If you want to get in touch with us, the easiest way is to go to the website, click on the Talk to an Expert button that you'll see in the top right corner of your screen. Just fill out the form and we'll reach back out to you and get in touch with you quickly. So that's the easiest way to get in touch with us. Or you can just go to corealm.com, click Talk to an Expert. Okay, thanks everyone, and hope to get a chance to see you soon, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye now.